Good evening, everyone. It's with particular pleasure that I would like to introduce Michael Rock and Giulio Bertelli. Amazing. I think we met 15 years ago. And in fact, you shared an early film of yours, I remember, and which showed a lot of promise, but perhaps had a sort of spirit of the world you were in then. It's 15 years on, a lot of literal water under the bridge with a long time in sailing. And then this is your first feature film. And I had the pleasure of watching it yesterday and the day before. But so tonight we'll be talking about that, showing some clips. But I think for many of you here, many of you students, to understand the journey of coming from a school like this, where Giulio did your undergrad,
Correct.
into something that feels similar in the level of complexity and endeavor as people face in architecture, but somehow much more complicated. But I'll leave that for you to explain. But welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for being here. I think first of all is difficult to start to talk about the project, considering most of you haven't seen the film. The film will most likely come out in UK in 2026. It was announced premiered in Venice in September. But I think going through the process of how I get to make my first film and its relationship to design, which is very important to me, is what I think would be the focus of this talk and conversation. I think the project started with this. Yes, wait, I can use this as well. Yeah. So the project started as an animation. So I was not really looking into direct a movie. This was probably 2017, 2018. And I started to imagine to write a project for an animation, which ultimately instead developed into a investigation of what could have been the Olympic Games today, and imagining some historical figures such as Joan d'Arc as some contemporary actors of a story set in a modern Olympic Games. And then the story expanded into multiple characters and with reference to multiple historical figures. And for quite some times in the writing and the development, we went to develop lots of possible hybridization between comic art and live action, and trying to develop sort of a style of what the film could look like as an animation. And at certain point, when we started to have a fairly solid script, we launched the idea of doing a exhibition, which happened a few years later at ETH in Zurich. And the exhibition was tackling the idea of what a teaser can be, a trailer for a movie. Imagining that traditionally you have a trailer that is composed of looking at like 1% of the 100% final project. A film that is finished and you just show 1% of it. And instead the idea was, what could an interactive exhibition look like if you wanted to show all of its or part of its research material, so 100% of the storyline, but at 1% of its development. So the idea was to do this device, like a sort of custom joystick that could scroll through part of text and show some images connected to the text as annotated diptychs. And all of this was shown in this kind of digital canvas that you can see on the left, some big e-reader basically. And the idea of using this display was the fact of, on one side, having an interactive display, but at the same time, when deprived of electricity, to be able to have it as a standalone object, like a movie poster that can be there, stored in a warehouse for years and years and years. Yes, so I think I'm gonna show the trailer of the movie. So what I think is interesting is the fact that this project as a film starts as an animation, goes into becoming an exhibition for his while developing the project further, and then ultimately becomes a live action film with actors and cast. And the reason for that is also because I think once you play within the movie industry, it has some rules like the architectural language that kind of shapes what form of the film, like in any endeavor that has exogenous funding, where we kind of collect financing and producers and financiers, and you try to put everything together, and this kind of also, and just like tax regulation in each country, like it's a very, very complex machine, exactly like architecture. And this, I think, also shapes where the movie is shot, the nationality of an actor, maybe content that you can or cannot use. And so slowly the script becomes more precise in a way, because you can really get to the core of the idea, but at the same time it changes. And this probably is one of the biggest similarities to the architectural practice.
Enjoy a little cancel adventure.
I'll just make a little bit of context of what the film is before going sort of in the design part of the film. The film unfolds mostly in 3 different layers. One is looking at the relationship between history of warfare and violence and the Olympic Games, and how they developed from sort of battlefield practice in peacetime into sports competition, then into sort of this in the late 19th century, and then into what we know now as sports, and also how is fading into the future of sport in relationship to e-games, e-sports, which kind of follows a similar path to also where part of modern warfare is going. So there's a symmetry between the last 100 years of these two, in a way, fields or industries. At the same time, it talks about all of the kind of this B-side of the sport industry, everything that is behind it, from regulation, measurements, sports medicine, everything we or the athletes had to go through to try to achieve their objective as professionals in the world of Olympics. But ultimately, it's just a story of 3 young female athletes who are trying to do what they would like to do, and the struggle that comes with it, which is kind of a feeling that I think everyone can relate to, that is not only linked to be an athlete. There's, I think, a value in the title of the film, which is AGON. That is a Greek word that refers to conflict and struggle in very different industries or fields or usage. Therefore, you have a sense of conflict that is the sport of and the struggle through the sport, but at the same time in the context of war, in legal context for the huge bureaucratical apparatus that there is that lies behind professional sports. And so it's always really kind of an investigation on everything that goes around these niche sports, and the way the Olympics also behave as sort of a geopolitical platform. I think one of the reasons why we also decided to speak about the film in the context of an architectural school or design school was the fact that I founded a firm with the idea to explore design of objects, space, garments through the use of cinema. So as if script writing becomes a design tool for imagining what could exist in our current society, and not just as a prop or for the movie, but instead how you can develop a project further into reality. And so within the movie we explore different ideas. We developed a custom, and some of these projects may already exist with a life by themselves, and some are under current development. For instance, we designed this sort of waterproof custom joystick to play video games, but also to play sort of this interactive sports kind of animation that I use to improve the performance of an athlete. I developed this physical printer which acts within the movie as a character by itself, and reimagining what a kind of portable physical device that has the ability to print messages as a standalone object could exist in a film, and how imagining this object in the film could help us to develop the design of the product itself. And finally we looked into the idea of food, and this is a company that at the moment already exists and is a freeze-dried food company, and we looked into the problem that an athlete faces, for instance, at the Olympics, where they end up eating just kind of burgers and McDonald's or bars because you don't want to have any form of food poisoning. And so from that idea, we looked into what could be the future of food, and how it could be developed into a product that not only fits the necessity of an athlete, but also everyone's in different contexts. And at the same time, we had the need for the film to imagine this new form of Olympics. And I think when the movie moved from being an animation to being a live action film, there was a big problem to solve, which was the fact that how do we tell the Olympics? How do we show an event that is huge and gigantic and has, thousands of people attending? And so I had to really kind of get to the essence of what sport is now, particularly niche sports, which they only exist as their basically video representation. And I started to imagine how these Olympic Games could actually happen within sound stages instead of in a sports arena. And this also unlocked the ability to think about the sound of sports, which usually we don't really hear, or not to the extent that I wished. So you kind of open a new layer of information in looking at sport. To stress this idea, we went through using these acoustic cameras, which are kind of industrial cameras that have the ability to look at sound in a way, giving a physical dimension instead of just recording the sound waves themselves, but also how the visual of it can propagate through space. And finally, which is also the reason why I'm here with Michael, we had the need to give an identity to these Olympics, their own branding. And I will show you a clip, and then I will leave the word to Michael.
Alex, I don't give a fuck. It's been 6 months now. I mean, it's pretty lame to kick you out for this, but I'm not gonna come see you. I'm gonna stay in New York. Yeah. Enjoy your little cancel adventure.
En garde, prêt, allez. Touche, quoi. Halte, double. Distance, s'il vous plaît. En garde. Prête? Allez. Halte, double. En garde, prêt, allez. Alt. Touche. Qua. Alt. Touche. Allez. Touche. Touche. Alt. 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 Touche. Qua.
Yeah, so before I leave word to Michael, just wanted to add that therefore AGON for me was really about exploring real pain in simulated warfare, which is sport, and try to have poetry, organic matter, and all of these technical apparatus to share this space of storytelling where design can be explored in ways that unfortunately no other creative industry allow for. I usually make the example of alien spaceship, like there's not really another comparison for a gigantic Hollywood studio movie that spends maybe $30 million in just developing a spaceship for a movie that has no existence outside of those 90 minutes on a screen. And I think probably everyone who does that could use that space as an opportunity to further develop the ideas and not have them sink just in the space of that film.
I've known Giulio since he's about 10, but I didn't really have anything to do with him until about a year and a half ago. He called and said he was planning this film and it was going to be at a kind of sports spectacle. And so branding would be a character in the film, really. And so, would we be willing to help define that? And you have to understand that for a designer, designing the Olympics is kind of the career-making project. But it turns out that designing the fake Olympics is actually much better. It's less lucrative maybe, but you don't have problems with clients or with nations or vitriolic public feedback and the kind of things that you normally get with your work nowadays. So what's been interesting is over the year and a half we've been working is really getting to know Giulio's vision for his creativity and then how that plays out in the film that he developed here and to be part of that. So I'm going to read a little bit about something I'm writing for it and then I'll freestyle some parts of it and we'll go from there. But I think to understand AGON at first, it's really instrumental to understand Giulio for most of his adult life has been an elite athlete and a competitive sailor. And sailing, especially when it's at the very highest level, is this intense combination of history and rules and regulations and training and physical and psychological endurance and choreography and teamwork and naval engineering and technology and fluid dynamics and aeronautics and meteorology and international governance and litigation and brand relationships and sponsorship and media publicity and of course lots and lots of resources. And that complex, I think, is really sort of the subject of this film. And so while AGON is cited at this imaginary sports spectacle, its subject really is this intertwined impact of physical, technical, national, legal, commercial, and social forces on a body. And in this case, 3 women's bodies. And each of the protagonists specializes in a martial sport with origins in physical violence, judo, fencing, and rifle, now recast in the warm glow of international collegiality and sportsmanship. But they're tightly controlled through this labyrinth of rules and governance and national and international regulatory bodies and team traditions and safety protocols and ranking systems and equipment standards and training regimes and nutritional supplements and bioenhancement technologies and reconstructive surgery and anti-doping and judicial review and branding and sponsorship. And so it's really this snarl that the film depicts. I think it can be challenging in the film then to discern the athlete in this blur of regulatory machinery. And drawing from his own life experience, Giulio's spoken poignantly about the loneliness at the center of contemporary sport training. And I think loneliness and isolation are really tangible here. The athletes train relentlessly, and they're propelled by this insatiable, seemingly inexplicable drive. But you have to ask, like, what exactly are they sacrificing so much to achieve? Fame? I wonder if anyone here could name the top competitive fencer in the world. Fortune? Absolutely not. The only gold is in the medals. Fun? At the end of this film, I doubt anyone will describe these journeys as fun. But despite it all, they continue to push through the loneliness, the pain, the boredom, the disconnection. And while this ferocious ambition provides propulsion, these athletes are components in this vast branded spectacle in which the competition and even the competitors are almost an afterthought. So in the games that Giulio imagined for this, as he mentioned, that he's removed the audience; they're eliminated, and that's why the sound is so different. Like there's no crowd to fill the space, and the the arena is really emptied of spectators, and so
This is not.
it's not part of the film. Yeah, sure. But
Should we check?
it's going to use because the joy and despair are only presumably expressed through this somehow stream of on-screen emojis. And I think it's worth noting that the thumbs up and thumbs down responses our current emoji world evokes the emperors dispatching their gladiators. By draining the arena of fans and transferring the competition to an arid soundstage, that isolation somehow is complete. The film then examines this intersection between the body and the lonely quest to perfect physical performance and the overwhelming structures created to measure, evaluate, improve, regulate, and brand it. In this way, I think elite sport comes to represent the technocratic and heavily branded reality we all struggle to navigate as we stumble through the bewildering, often alienating sprawl of contemporary life. So this brings us to our unique challenges of AGON: to imagine a sports spectacle without an audience, in a city that doesn't exist, and most importantly, to avoid getting sued by the International Olympic Committee. So, according to the IOC, you can't even use the name of a city and a date without somehow infringing on their copyright. So LUDOJ is a fiction. It's a vaguely foreign-sounding capital of an unknown country, imperfectly remembered. The name's derived from Esperanto, the language without nationality. And at risk of copyright infringement, there can be no Olympic rings, no Olympic colors, no theme song, no regalia. So our event needed to evoke the feeling of something plausibly familiar while feeling slightly off. The replacement of the physical event by live streaming demands branding, because without the ubiquitous civic presence of sport branding, every Olympic, World Cup, Super Bowl is expected to plaster the city with its presence. A virtual event achieves its visual coherence by the way that it appears on screen. It's what Benedict Anderson refers to as the infinite quotidian reproducibility of its regalia. In other words, a brand works because it can continuously regenerate itself in a coherent, structured way and be immediately recognized in the millisecond it takes to flick past it on Instagram, where only a single click or flick separates Fox from NBC or UFC from WWE or Disney from Pornhub. So if you wanted to engineer a design project that demonstrates the impact of the author, time, technology, and national identity on design, you couldn't do better than the Olympic branding, because every 4 years, the exact same brief is tackled by a new team charged with both solving some very basic communication problems and representing the essence of their nation at a specific moment in time. And each individual Olympic brand attempts to express its own zeitgeist, its own national spirit, its own approach to internationalism, its own design ideology, all within the tightly scripted outline of expectation. So in designing LUDOJ 24, we had to imagine ourselves as LUDOJians and aspire to create something unique for our games. And in that spirit, we introduced something completely unfamiliar in Olympic branding, which is blurriness. To imagine the imaginary LUDOJ 24 games, you have to imagine a culture willing to embrace ambiguity. So, excuse me now for a brief digression into the history of Olympics. But the Olympics, as I said, is a highly litigious organization which has copyrighted every piece of its identity. But it has a kind of history where it comes into branding over time. And so if you look at the first decades of the game, it was a pretty homey affair, quite comfortable and easy, but without a kind of overwhelming technical identity. But it was really in 64 with Yoshiro Yamashita's iconography and pictographs for the Olympics that it starts to take on this really global, international look to the regalia. And this was really in a direct response to the work that they were doing in terms of creating a kind of international picture language. So you think of this as like a visual Esperanto that could be used for anywhere and that could be applied in any culture. And this is all based on a lot of the work that was done in the 30s by Adonurath, who was looking for this idea of the isotype, or this a language that could be communicated to everyone at once. And as the Olympics developed, Neurath's idea of this isotype of these images became a basis to the substance of what the Olympics look like. And it went through many different iterations. Last Wyman in 68's fantastic work for Mexico. But really, it reached its peak in 72, and with Adolf Eicher's work for Munich. And this is where he developed a highly rational system for creating these icons based on a one grid system where everything could be fit into this one graphic language. And this really became the basis for the kind of iconography you see everywhere now, right? So that these forms of the rounded arm, the circle head, etc., were really developed there, and now ubiquitous around the world to many people's chagrin. As the Olympics developed, then, if you think about that becoming this point of the height of internationalism, this pure language that could be applied to anything, and then in fact was applied to everything as iconography around the world. These later ones then attempted to work with Eicher's iconography and create their own language, moving away from that the simplicity and the purity of the rational system. And really, if you look at Lillehammer, there's this move away from the international to the vernacular, where each country tries to dig into its own national spirit and find a language for what could be the basis of this. And so you start to get these kind of strange experiments of something that this is based in some runic drawings that lead to this kind of iconography. And Athens going to Greek pottery, Sydney for some reason with the boomerang. But really, I think that Beijing in 2008 by Min Wang really is the end result of that, of moving away from that internationalism to this highly scripted nationalism. And this was early characters that were inscribed on turtle bones. That was the basis for Chinese character language. And then using that as the inspiration for how the iconography of the Olympics worked. And what I think it really is that the Olympics reached this saturation point where the system was so strong that it didn't need to be consistent anymore. It needed to only imply its system, and it could be reinterpreted through all these different lenses. One other digression from this digression is I think that there's a cultural study to be done on Olympic mascots. In this chart, we chart from the creepy to the friendly, and from the boring to the Thursday we didn't do. Yeah, right. We didn't do a mascot, unfortunately, and I really regret not doing it. It's a really strange language, and I would just say that my favorite and least favorite are Mariscal's Kobe for the Barcelona Olympics, and I liked it because he was the only mascot that smoked. And the one on the right for Atlanta, which was so bad they couldn't even come up with a name, so it's called What Is It? And And its nickname was Izzy, so that was sort of like the end of the whole the possible process. So okay, so thank you for that brief digression. So back to the Olympics. So even as they're refreshed every 4 years, the core structure of the Olympics is perpetual. And if 72 marked this peak of pure utopian internationalism and the erasure of national identity in the system, 2008 demonstrates the Olympic system is so established and ubiquitous, so embedded in our collective consciousness that it can withstand constant reinterpretation and nationalization without the diminution of its power. The strategy is continuous. The tactics are malleable. The Olympics then may be the embodiment of the neoliberal dream of freedom of movement, capital, content, and labor without regard to borders. It's a finely tuned machine calibrated to retell the same kind of story in each iteration. It's selecting new dramas to highlight. Therefore, the games are fueled by a perpetual stream of new athletes, stories, and crises from which to create always familiar narratives. In the oft-repeated words of the typical Olympic broadcast, AGON is up close and personal, the name for scripted segments that run through mini biographies charting stories of hardship and redemption. We are right there in it with these women. In the end, however, it's the spectacle that persists. The brand may be rejuvenated every 4 years, like the constant wave of eager young talent, but the basic storylines are always the same. It's the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. The specifics of the competition may be new, and when you pull back far enough from the heartbreak of the individual, the big picture is always utterly predictable. This formula for which the women of AGON are scripted has provided to be incredibly lucrative, and it's estimated that in 2004, the Olympic brand, not anything that it owns or has, just the brand, is valued at $11.4 billion. So given the scale of an enterprise, the athletes may come and go, but the games will go on and on and on. Thank you.
I feel a little bit like it's unfair because there's so many people in this audience who might not have seen the film. So I might use this as a way of taking us through some of those themes. But just picking up a little bit on what you were talking about, Michael, particularly the last image. And I'm wondering if, do you ever read the David Foster Wallace, How Tracy Austen Broke My Heart? It's very much about that, the painful journey of the athlete and then the banality of their description of their lives. So, it was a difficult struggle, but it came good in the end. It was a team effort. All these
somebody has to win and everyone else loses.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of platitudes that actually mask an incredibly intense. So Tracy Austen was in multiple car accidents, had career-ending injury. Was one of the first kind of young tennis players of a long stream of them. And I think that's sort of picked up in the up close and personal. And maybe that's a good link back to maybe something we talked about yesterday, is that this is up close and depersonalized. And I think that just to kind of I think that may be apparent from some of the imagery that you've been shared in the clips and the trailer, but there's this sort of austerity, which I think also comes out of this new envisaging of the Olympics. And I'm wondering if both of you might speak to that. The limitation of palettes, the limitation of
First of all, I think that in some of these sports, in actually most of them, most athletes that compete don't even have a chance to actually compete. So you go through a 15, 20 years career knowing that your place is understanding how average you will be. And I think this is very important to remember, because there's not only the narrative about so everyone is still trying to win because that's your duty as an athlete. For some, it is in the range of your possibility. For others, is you just go through this suffering, solitude, in a way, banality, protocols. Every day is the same, knowing that you will just hang there. And I think this it's important and goes back to the austerity, I think. because the machine of sport and the practice of sport and also being an athlete, it's almost like it persists in your head and you are sort of separating yourself from the context, unless the context is in function of what you need to do tomorrow, how you can improve your job as an athlete, but it just completely absorbs you. So it came natural as a filmmaker to me at least, to look at this from like being very closed, but from the outside as one element of a bigger machine.
Well, and I think that one of the tropes of the Olympics always is like just getting here was enough, right? And you can really break down like the lines even of, who would repeat it every 4 years. The story is always the same. It comes out of hardship, and the father made the skis out of a tree in the backyard, and then they eventually win, and then they're knocked out in the first round, but they're still somehow right. It was an honor to be there or something like that. So I think what's interesting is that it's just long enough to where it's not grating, but really when you watch it, it's the same thing over and over and over again, the same way of storytelling, the same trajectory that happens, and as Giulio said, like all but a tiny fraction ever make any kind of accomplishment. And I didn't even know until the movie that many nations pay their athletes for medals, and that you get $100,000 in Italy if you get a gold medal, but everyone else gets nothing.
No, it's extraordinary. And I'll maybe kind of set the scene a little bit, because I think it's a film that has a tremendous set of overlapping themes, some very, very deep. And you mentioned, these are sports that have derived from warfare. Most recently there was news around, the Ukrainian soldiers gamifying, having a reward system around drone warfare. So it's inevitable that sense of isolation. What I think is remarkable about the film is that it deals with the intensity of experience. It infers the depth of that experience, and yet it has a peculiar, uncanny quality of, again, the isolated figure. And then there's often some ambiguity of kind of crossover between something that may be a more digital environment, a gaming environment, and then this highly constructed reality of the actual combat scene, which I think is super interesting.
But one important thing is that it's really a coincidence, but probably it's not a coincidence, but it's very interesting, is that in the European, mostly continental European, I'm not sure in UK, but in a lot of countries in Europe and not only, you as a professional athlete, which actually you're a professional athlete, but you call amateur athlete if you're at the Olympics because you cannot have sponsors. The way you are paid by in a way the state is by belonging to a army corps.
Yeah.
So it's not the case in the US, I think, but it goes at a link to university, but most of Europe is like this. So it's funny because it's like you are a Navy officer, which you've never been on a ship ever and you will never do, to be a fencer, which kind of goes back to this idea of the relationship for where sports come from and the athleticism comes from. And so I think, and of course, now the IOC has officially made the esports, so video games or some form of them, an official competition with a medal at the Olympics. And at the same time, you have in modern warfare a heavy use of digital interactions, and most likely also in the future will be higher and higher. But at the same time, you have the trenches, and there is this continuous argument in within the military, similar to within the sports, of like, who is a real soldier? Is a drone operator a real soldier, or is just the guy in the trenches? So in the same is world of sport. It's funny because you may find a professional swimmer who thinks that the video games at the Olympics is a disgrace. But what is funny is that the very first sport of the Olympics was shooting. Pierre de Coubertin himself was a pistol shooter. So actually, if you want to be very philological about the history of the sport, the very first sport is the one that hasn't really changed from from the past 130 years. And it's really just about sort of eye-hand coordination. So there's no physical endeavor in the sense of traditional fatigue or athleticism. And so this, I think, is a important reminder of also how the perception of the sport has changed so much. I think, to put it as a simple example, I don't think anyone, if you need to invent the Olympics today, you would put as your first sport one that has a gun with a real bullet that kills someone. And this is why the Olympic sport is trying to fade out of that. But at the same time, those are the very, very first sports. This is a complicated topic for them. And even now that I'm going into esports, what the scene in the movie talks about the fact that what they really want to make sure is that they don't bring Call of Duty, let's say. So you're not aiming at people, but you're aiming at targets. So there is all. So this layer of violence is so underlying that it's constantly in the conversation, yet never addressed. I make a last example in judo, which unfortunately I've not watched the movie. The movie goes through some also graphic images, particularly in the context of the sport of judo. And judo is a sports federation that you cannot show in any picture and or video someone is getting injured. So this I discovered. It's, of course, you write this movie and all of a sudden you see this, there is this strong relationship with reality, and you imagine certain ideas and kind of reality overlaps on top of it or surpasses your ideas. And when I went to do some investigation before making this movie, I went to the World Cup of Judo. A guy sort of breaks his eyebrow, starts bleeding. I take a picture just as a reference. I get blocked by some security guards. They asked me to cancel off the material, and then I asked why was that. The federation, and I was told that in judo, the International Federation and the Japanese Federation, they say clearly, we do not show people getting injured. We don't want to give the idea that through the sports of judo you can get injured.
It's just dancing.
I think also in the film it depicts the gamification of training too. That a lot of training now is a digital training, which will train your eye-hand coordination or speed and things like that. So the crossover of game and video game and technology is so complicated, and then the idea of bringing esports into the Olympics, and then what kind of sport is that exactly? So I think that's a really important feature of the whole thing.
Which is, I say last thing on this first. There's a line in the movie, game or sport, because also there's a difference between, even in the grammatical sense, even though we miss the two of, is it a game, is it a sport? This exists both in the context of video games, like, so it's gonna be FIFA as a sport competition, it's gonna be like Tetris. But already sports, in what we use as sport, like football, European football, is considered a game, not a sport. So this division already exists within the sports category of the Olympics, and now they're redoing the same conversation on the digital ones. Yeah.
What's the Olympic Games ultimately? No?
Yeah, and the word itself, exactly. So it's
Exactly. I mean, I think also for the benefit of the audience, there's this kind of wider question of, the extent of collaboration, where your conversation started. I mean, how early did the conversation between the two of you start? You're one piece of this that then started to shape a...
Well, I came in quite late, I think, into the process because we've been working on it for 5 years already, and so, which was, it may be useful because I had no preconceived ideas about it, and so I could read the script and have a direct response to it. I never knew it as an animation. I never knew the show or anything like that. So to really just start from the script and think about it that way. But I think that then to try to embrace this idea of the film as a world that you're designing into. So it has its own logics and its own meanings, that are different from the world outside. And so you have to kind of accept the film for what it's like. And so we didn't really start designing the things until the shooting had already started. I mean, we talked a lot about what it would be and what the parts would be, but you really had to understand sort of what that world was like and how it would be. And so it's like the printer or the tractor or the other things that were designed for the film. It's just like another one of those elements. Yes.
But I think is similar to also other design practice in this relationship. It was for me the problem, not with Michael, but eventually with some other collaborators that I started to have conversation, is the fact that you, particularly in such a complex machine like movie making, which takes a lot of resources, a lot of people compressed in a limited time frame, you cannot afford to bring someone along with you that doesn't actually understands what you're trying to do. So it's really not about designing a logo, which I love. We find this an interesting idea, the blurs, and I'm super happy. And a soft, unconscious reminder of the Olympic rings, I think, is kind of really perfect, and I never got tired of looking at it. But the point was that is just one element of a much wider conversation that then address why shooting the movie, how do you shoot the sports, how do you edit it, what to do with sound. So it was then a creative collaboration conversation all through production. Here's in the room there's Tom Whitley, who made the music, there's Christopher Johnson, who helped me with the design of some other elements of the film. And I think is this collaborative effort where you clearly, me as a author, writer, director, you want to make sure that it's as precise as you want, but unfortunately or fortunately you cannot do that if you don't have you don't work with people that actually understand what you're trying to do. Because but the reason why I'm saying this is not as a sort of banal generalization of the fact of working with people that understands you, that you like. It's literally also down to time. If it's not down to time, you just juggle on people, and you slowly keep on kind of correcting and adjusting for months and months and months. But when you don't have those months, you have 36 hours to deliver something, and you're working on other things, you need to make sure that because if intellectually you're aligned and you are on the idea, then you know that whatever comes as an output may not be exactly what you wanted, but it's gonna be sort of intellectually safe and sound and coherent to the project.
But I think also this process, you try from the script, you try as best as can to imagine it. There's lots of parts of the movies I don't understand, or and you see them come to life, and then maybe you do, or maybe you don't, and so it keeps changing for you. And when I saw the film on the big screen for the first time with Tom's full score on it, it was totally a different film for me, because the sound adds so much to that experience. And so I wasn't thinking about that when we were working on it, but then you see it as like, now I understand what's going on here, So I think that each part of it adds so much to the overall effect, but you can't necessarily anticipate that in the beginning. So
And this in a way is the reason why we're here, and I think and the fact of still deciding to have this conversation, even though it's not after a screening, it's not a traditional Q&A, is the fact that this just speaks so well to, I think, the process of architectural design, in a way, of multiple elements.
Exactly, but today I did my seminar at Drawing Matter, and with a friend of mine, and he was saying, as architects, we live so much in our drawings, almost more than we do in the buildings we make, because somehow they let us down, and of course they're not single authored, they're the work of many people in tremendous compromise, and I can't answer for you. It feels slightly different when making a film. It feels that perhaps through the editorial process or through the way in which you coordinate with this kind of mass collaboration, multiple locations, multiple teams, that somehow you can live more in the film itself than you do in the preparation for it. And I don't know if there are parallels between the drawing and the building and the making and the final product, or if the final film feels desperately.
Well, I do think this aspect, where all buildings start and die as graphic design, and so a huge majority of the buildings that you ever experience, you experience them through pictures or through drawings or something. You're not in them. I've seen thousands of buildings I've never been in, but so you experience them through this other media somehow. So that aspect of the translation from making the drawing to making the building to being in the building to experiencing the building with people in it. It seems like that's a lot of steps to get to really understand that. So,
But I guess the architect themselves feels terribly disappointed with the final product. No matter what.
Yeah. That's true in most architect, yeah.
Yes, I think is to some extent is almost like, of course, when I thought about making movies, I always looked at it from a design point of view, both in the sense of a platform to explore certain ideas, but also how do you work on things, the process. Personally, I always wanted to make a film in still pushing the envelope of it, trying to do new things, but at the same time kind of in its full industry experience, with the production has traditionally is made, and the post-production, the financing process, the sales process, you go to a festival, distribution, all of these things. So it's like experiencing all of these system, rules and regulation that all of the director that kind of shaped my creativity when I was a teenager kind of had to go through, maybe in a different time. But then at the same time, you're constantly thinking, oh, this probably would be better if we do it this way. As a work approach, like workflow, how you do things, who you get involved, how many people do it, when do you do it in the process. And I think in architecture, you kind of go through the same, but it's definitely less compressed in time, probably. But it's also true that it depends from project to project. And in a way, for instance, if we take a commitment of some client, a restaurant owner who asks you, let's make something based on not like the biggest museum in the world. You have dialogue with someone, and that relationship is key to understand how much room you will have as a professional to do what you want to do. In this sense, the role of a producer, the role of a distributor, the role in the case of filmmaking, it's similar, because there will be a moment where your expectation and the client expectation, let's say, do not coincide. They're not going to be the same. How distant they are or how close they are, is where I think is you need to try to keep that distance as close as possible, in my opinion, to be able to try to express what you wanted as an idea, because then there is support on the other end also, and the life of a film is very long. And in the similar point of architecture, how many stories do we hear recently of buildings that have been designed, but then the developer comes in, the project changes a lot, and then eventually the designer decides to remove the signature or not. Just
I suppose what I'm getting at is that I think for many people in this room, or certainly in this building, from their perspective, making a film feels like this kind of beautiful thing that has, a sort of integrity of creative intention. And I think for the conversations we've had, and even just, you can see that there's a lot of effort in the film. I mean, it's very carefully poised. And I think I mentioned this yesterday. If you look at the full credits, the number of locations and teams and groups of people that will be operating in completely different contexts, you feel the weight of that effort. And yet, perhaps there's a parallel that you may want to talk about between the sort of relentless endeavor of the athletes that you're focusing on that has little reward, and the total commitment to the finishing of a film, and the arena in which that then plays out in, either publicly, financially, etc., is in 2025 is obviously very different to when the Olympics started or when film was at its most commercial heyday. I think there may be parallels that I don't know if you're...
And I think having been an athlete, I myself, at a professional level, I have a very healthy relationship with competition, because competition is this is basically the goal of your activity. Is competition itself. In the sense, I tend to make this example, which is if you are at a table with 10 filmmakers, and journalist comes by and says, "Oh, any of you would like to win an Oscar?" Everyone will say, "No, me, awards, I don't care. It's the art," you know? And if you go to a table of 10 athletes, it's their duty, even though they don't want to, because they're fed up, to say yes. And so this is I think it's a very interesting element about the world of of sport, or generally the world of competition, because there's a person that are entitled to express that opinion without being sort of rejected or judged by society. And referring to what you were saying about the credits, different topic, but I think we mentioned this yesterday briefly, and I think is something I would like to repeat myself in a way. Credits in cinema are this very controlled. Even in credits, there's rules of regulation. It's not you write what you want. Yes, independent European film, you have some freedom. US-based American production studio, no. The position, one before the other, the wording, everything is very clearly stated, either by contract, by union rules. It's not you do what you want. How they need to be appear, single card. There's a lot of rules. Then eventually, if you want to do a little bit more artistic titles, let's say, you can go and talk specifically with all of the unions, with all of the person in charge, and kind of, eventually accommodates a notification. And also, everyone who has worked in the movie is in the credits, plus thanking extra ones. So let's say you have a friend. This is just like a sort of tradition in the industry. You have a friend who has gone through reading the script 15 times in 5 years. You put him, you thank him. Yeah. It's printed in the credit and will be there forever, unless he doesn't want to. I think it's very fascinating that and what is beautiful is that as a young filmmaker, you want to know who was the prop master who actually made the object of the head of a zombie movie in 2015 that you loved. You go on the credits, you find his name. Okay, he made this. You can phone him up.
Yeah.
In architecture, like in most art world or fashion design, or I think almost anything, and I mean, I would have to, maybe someone will correct me, but you don't have this access to this information. So if tomorrow I want to know, because I love that lamp over there, exactly who's the designer, who built it, eventually who installed it here, because I particularly enjoy the way it is installed, and I think the work is fantastic. And I just walk by this building. There's no credits of a building like you go through and you look everything,
Yeah.
So this, I think, is it's something beautiful, and is when some of this formality, they exist in our world, in a sense, in a positive way, that we give for granted, but actually I think they are meaningful. They're not just out there.
I want to leave some room for our audience to ask some questions. I have so many other questions. It's like proprioception, which I think is super important, but we can do this at dinner. Are there questions from our audience?
Yeah, I haven't seen the film. But it looks wonderful. But I'm a filmmaker involved with film. So I wondered what your reference points were in terms of cinema. Who are influences? Because again, I've only seen extracts. It looks kind of science fiction. very clean, futuristic. So yeah, where did you go for reference points to share with other people?
I think it's almost like there are two lists in a way. One is that all of the directors that kind of shape your idea of cinema, and then the other examples that are specific to this project. I remember when I was working with my director of photography, I was really kind of thinking, okay, what does this movie, to the point that was developed, and we started to know, who are the actors, who's non-actor, what are we doing exactly in the day-to-day. Then I started to, and also you have absorbed so much all of the themes and the ideas of the movie, that we kind of made a shorter list of what we thought were, at the moment when we were shooting, relevant. And that was probably a Rosie movie about Rosie, unfortunately that director, not the current documentarian, about corrida in Spain, which had this cinematic dualism between kind of realism and sort of documentary, and very specific choice of lenses for when shooting the sport, a very different type of attitude towards shooting when he was telling the story of everyday life of these toreros in Spain in the 70s. Then Conversation by Coppola, the idea of sound. And then another two movies more contemporary that are probably was one, Under the Skin, by Jonathan Glazer, a British director, because of his again this clear split. I saw it as, for mostly two reasons, for the split of the movie being part of it hyper choreographed, or more like an advertisement, and part of it kind of CCTV stolen cameras, or so these two languages within the same movies. And the idea that it was looking at the story of an alien, sort of a science fiction movie, but with a completely different point of view. And I knew that my movie had I didn't know at the time whether I would manage to make a good movie, bad movie, whatever, but I knew it had a point of view. Yeah, I knew it was looking at this through a specific lens. It wasn't just generic. Let's talk about sport. I couldn't care less. And then I think there was a flair about certain type of settings. That another movie that we watched a lot before shooting the movie was The Girlfriend Experience by Steven Soderbergh. That was then some of these reference we kind of absorbed, and maybe you can see them. Others, they are just the reference that were there, and there's no point of connection, I think. But
Hello. I want to ask a question about the printer, actually. It was really interesting when you mentioned in the beginning that the printer itself was a character in the film. And it's going to be difficult to ask this question because I haven't seen the film, but even through the clips I've seen, it's sort of clear that there's not a single world within the frame, and there's multiple, there's this object quality to it. But when you said that, the printer being a character in the film also developed its process, design process, as an object. So I want to ask that, the process behind it, as in how an object becomes a character in the film, and then so there's this production of the film and the production of the object, and then how do they communicate, or how does it actually work?
I think it'll be more difficult after you see the film. Yes. Which I'm not even sure if I'm proud of it, but fortunately that's the case. I think we have one important point to start is, and this is a question I write to myself because I don't really know the answers. because I can change in my own consciousness in a way, is the printer in the film because I thought it added something to the movie, or is the printer there because I just want to make this printer and therefore I find a way to do it?
Product placement.
Yeah, constant exercise of product placement, you know. I think it's both. Depends which day I wake up, probably. But there's like so it's sometimes it's in the way I'm trying also in the future create this relationship. Sometimes it starts like I'm writing a scene in a restaurant. This is actually this relationship really started like this in about 18 years ago, maybe, when I was a late teenager, just before coming here. Started to write my first movie. I think of a scene in a restaurant, and I think, why do I have to pick a restaurant? I was just coming to the idea, and I was thinking, oh, maybe when I make a movie, I'll think, oh, I'll probably should design a restaurant for the movie that then maybe exists because someone else runs the restaurant. So this was really how all of this kind of relationship between design process and the film started. And so in the case of the printer was like, there was sometimes that I had this idea of developing this object and I knew that within the film I had to break this realism, this sense of almost documentary, like this sense of I'm showing exactly how a topping test is made. So I constantly had to break this, and to break this, there are in the movie, unfortunately, I haven't seen different solutions. One of which was to develop this very unclear object that prints some poetries that hopefully you watch the movie, you don't understand in a way what is there, but you also don't think that there's no place for it, because it says something about it speaks about the idea that they also have a private life, the life that we were saying before maybe an athlete doesn't really have, but it's like, okay, what do you like? Maybe these three girls liked, all of them, that they don't know each other in the movie, liked the same strange, odd technical device that prints comic book or poetry. But I think the point is, for me, always either find an excuse for something to exist in the movie, or how a movie shows me some condition to think, oh, this would be something that would be beautiful to develop as a project itself. And some may have further development and be presented to the world as a company by themselves, like the freeze-dried food, and other may just exist as a research project.
I think there's this aspect where it disrupts the reality of the film, because I've never really understood the printer in the film, but it's a place where somehow the surface is wrinkled, right? Like, what kind of world is it that has this thing? And I think Giulio's mentioned before that when you're making this film, and typically in the Olympics, the athletes from different disciplines have almost nothing to do with each other, right? So these women wouldn't know each other, but they have this connection, this weird technical connection through this device. So it's a way to sort of draw them together, even though they never meet each other in the film. They're never seen in the same scene together. So.
I think I read this in a much more banal way, that I'm sure there's a bunch of objects and endeavors that might not have made it into the film.
Yes. Many. Many. So basically, once the movie was, once the reality hits you as a filmmaker, in your first film, you don't really know the process. And of course, everything has cost, complications, schedule, logistics. So the movie changes, as I was saying before, not just for budget, but also because you understand better what you want to say. And so you say, this doesn't make any sense. This we keep, this we cannot do. So definitely there's a version of the script particularly when it was an animation that is a much wider project where also a lot of these designed project exist. There's a custom rifle to hunting rifle for the rifle shooter in the film. There's many more.
I can imagine maybe 3 or 4 different sort of supplement companies, about 4 or 5 different proprioception gaming devices.
No, but it's exactly like this. It's like there is how do you, but I think the beauty of this is something that is not new per se in the world of art. There's a whole tradition of certain artists, video artists particularly in the 90s, early 2000s, that have explored this relationship between how movie can generate realities. But I think the difference is what I'm trying to do is that trying not to make it a sort of a gimmick. So it's like, okay, you try to really make it into a reality, not a fictional built reality, but like something that have its own proper life by its own.
Yes, I have a very large voice, but so I don't need the microphone and a terrible Dutch accent as well. But I have a question from Michael. Why were you so attracted to the project? And then to stick actually to the title, very specific, film as an investigation and a storytelling as practice. What would you say?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's a very typical job for me. It's not atypical in a sense. Like anytime that you accept a job, you basically agree to exist to the reality of the person who's hiring you, right? And so it's you become part of that world, and then you try to fit yourself into it in the best way possible. So in that way, it wasn't atypical as a thinking about it. But I do think that the interesting thing about working in a film rather than working in real life or something, like if I was doing the real Olympics, the pressures on the real Olympics would be so different than the pressures of the film. I only had to be honest to the film itself and to be weird or acceptable or something like that. And so you just kind of absorb that and become part of that world somehow. And so for a designer, that's the really interesting thing, because I'm not an artist. I'm making something which is supposed to fit into something else. And so and in this case, I'm working for Giulio. I'm not working for myself. And so I'm trying to figure out like what works in his film and in the vision that he has. And if he wants it to be read, then it can be read. It's not like me, I have to do it. But, I think that the collaboration, you start to sort of create this world together, and then things make sense. And, then as your visions come together, you both make the same decisions because you understand the world together. And, so it's a nice space to work in, and different from maybe the commercial world where the stakes sometimes we higher, but also the irritation could be a lot higher too.
Or more, how do you say that's, freer, and you can,
But not freer. It's not a freer world, because you're still responsible for my relationship with Giulio. I'm responsible to the world that he's trying to make. So I don't feel like I can do anything I want now in this place. I can do something that makes sense in the context that you're working in, which is the same as all my jobs, I think.
There's a lot of the earlier part of the conversation about you mentioned that in your some explanation in your talk, but a lot of it was there was a big problem in to start with about not getting a massive lawsuit from the Olympics. So a lot of the conversation happened just as a conception level of what is that are graphically recognizable, that will allow you to, without making untasteful sort of decision, what is there that could help you to convey a similar idea. And I think a lot of the conversation was not on the beginning of the graphic design, but on thinking, what is it that is this?
I mean, even naming, like that was a long discussion we had in terms of what should the city be named, and where should it be, where should we imagine it is, and then thinking about the name of the film itself. That was also a big conversation. So it was
I can speak about this. So yeah, naming the LUDOJ 2024 was so in the movie itself. There's never they talk about the Olympics, and I can talk about the Olympics and how this movie is about the Olympics. So I know I'm okay, but in the movie itself, you cannot have. I know this sounds absurd, but unfortunately, that's the case with traditional filmmaking. You cannot have an actress saying in London 2012 she won the gold medal. You can say in London she won the gold medal, or you can say in 2012 she won the gold medal, but you cannot say
A place in a time.
exactly. So, so the title of the film was different and had part of the word Olympic in it, and unfortunately, that's something that we decided together with the producer and distributor not to move forward. But again, this helped me and Matilde Solbiati, who actually found the name AGON, went into this, months-long conversation, discussion about what is the right title for the movie, because what is the movie? So there's a lot of exercise that you self-imposed to find solutions that are not needed. You're not, saving someone in the street that just got hit by a car, but there's this constant intellectual exercise in trying to find exactly what you're doing, even in the fictional world you created. So there is a list of other cities, there's list of other dates, there's list of other logos. There's plenty and plenty of material that was generated for this. How many? What's the visual style? Also, do you do how many? It's possibly it's kind of endless, and we did a lot of work. And like, do you choose the date? It's 2024. The movie was supposed to come out in 2024, and then people, no, but it shouldn't have a date because then it's so. But the beauty of this conversation is that they are, they're not generic. They're very specific, and by being very specific, you're actually addressing what are you trying to do. So is similarly the film, and hopefully in general the topic I'm tackling, there's either this quality of sort of macro that you look for, macro patterns that you can connect them together, such as the relationship between history of warfare and sports, but also hyper microscopic, like you actually look into the details of something, of how something is made.
And then when you name anything, there's a whole bunch of very banal but important things. Can it be searched? Can you get trademark? Can you does it fit on a URL? There's a whole bunch of things you have to figure out that as well. So no decision is unimpeded. Right.
So, yes, I have one question about the role of the critic and the reviewer, because they're not on that roll call or on the credit list. They're the sort of one role or person that has a great influence in a way on a film, but isn't on that credit list. And they may have a good or a bad influence. It's questionable. And I just wondered, and also within this room, not everybody's seen the film, but everybody has access to the reviews now because they come out so quickly. And I wondered, a very simple question, do you read reviews or don't you? Because some actors and actresses, there are those that won't look at a review because it's not relevant, maybe for the way they can consider their performance or their work, or there is those that will with them and are comfortable with that. And the unexpected, is it a creative? Do you read them or not? And is it, if you do, is that a creative part of the contribution to the process?
Personally, I didn't read all of them. Not because there were that many, just because I don't want to read. So ideally, I think I wouldn't want to read too much of them. I try to, this is very honest, I try to read maybe quickly to get the essence of it, but not as precise, so that my mind can get fixated with the details of a language of someone else. I don't care about. I didn't read the good ones. Zero. I couldn't care less because it's irrelevant. I read the bad ones, or the fortunately there were no bad ones, but I think this is a problem because in general reviewers they're not doing, whether it's art or cinema, that rarely doing really bad ones. But I read the ones that I was told were not great, so that I could look into what they were saying and try to understand if I agreed or not. And I remember one I agreed. So I thought that the problem he identified in the film were things that if I could have, I would have solved. So I totally agreed. And then I remember reading another negative review. Again, the negative part of a average review, let's say this. And thinking that no, I was like fine with him writing this because in my opinion, his opinion of what was critiquing was biased in a way that I was not interested. So I didn't. I thought that there was nothing from me to learn out of that. But the short answer is good ones, no, didn't read them. I was told, this is good review, and it's cool. Bad ones, the passage of the negative passage in the average review I read to maybe learn.
It's great. I think we have to, but you can have a conversation. Now, we're going to have to, I think, wrap up, but I want to thank you both so much. So this will stream from February, is that right?
Yes, not sure exactly about the date, but we'll come to UK in some form, maybe in theaters, maybe online. Unfortunately, I cannot say more, but we'll come in UK.
But it's a film that sort of sticks with you. It's given me a lot to think about. I have many, many more questions for you. I will bore you over dinner. But thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Giulio.
Thank you very much.